Welcome to the Spilling the Tea podcast. I will be one of your co-hosts today. I'm Lisa Loud from the Secret Network Foundation, and this podcast is called Spilling the Tea, where we unveil confidential computing insights from industry leaders. It's not your average podcast. This is Spilling the Tea podcast. So we have a really special guest today that we're excited to bring to you. And with that, without further ado, I'm going to introduce my co-host, Zoe McFox. Zoe is a partner at Fallen Network, and she has been bringing industry insights in AI, confidential infrastructure for AI, for some time, and is a leader in the field. So welcome, Zoe, and over to you.
Amazing. Hello, Lisa, and hello, everyone. Welcome back to Spilling the Tea. Excited about the session today and to introduce Sylvain Bellemare, our special guest for today. Hey, Sylvain, how are you?
Hi, how's it going? Good.
Great. Calling in from LA today, but actually a Canadian, right? We just talked about it. You and Lisa both are from there. So it's exciting to have you on. I mean, we know each other quite well from a lot of TE and Web3 conferences. I just looked it up. It was almost last year, 1 year ago, right? In March 2024, when we talked about TEs at East Denver. It was a special event, was actually an event, our first DCC, Decentralized Confidential Compute event with Secret Network, Vala, and Sylvain was also there on stage. So maybe we touch on this a little bit as well. And Sylvain, you're a research and software engineer, right? Focusing on open source and verifiable hardware. So that's why we are talking a lot today from the research perspective, different than from other sessions where we talk more about technicalities that are being developed or protocols, projects. Sylvain brings a very unique insight into how can we actually enhance or bring research, what kind of research is being worked on to make TEs better. And we really want to talk a little bit today about the criticism, right? Why are TEs, they're very good in some things, but we also need to be very transparent and open. Hey, there are some critics, and how can we overcome these challenges? And also to overall make them Web3 ready, right? This is how we can phrase it, because TE is actually not a Web3 technology, but it's used more and more in combination with blockchain. So we want to touch on all of these topics, and Sylvain is our expert in this because last year in October, he also released a research paper calling, or it's named Research Direction for Verifiable Physically Secure Hardware. So we will link this down here and everyone should have a read in there, but we will summarize most of these outcomes and findings today. So Sylvain, first question over to you is also, I mean, you can talk maybe a little bit about your journey, but maybe the inspiration and the inspiration for this research. And the first question is more about what kind of misalignments are there? Why are you working off Web3 ready TEs? What problem are we talking here as an introduction?
Okay, well, thank you for having me. So maybe I should briefly mention this research paper, right? It's just a draft and it's a preprint so that people don't think it's not peer-reviewed work. And it's just been my effort to put my own thoughts and understanding about the current situation with TEs, especially in the blockchain context. So now to go back to your question, well, I've been working with TEs for a bit 4 or 5 years or so in the context of doing applications and protocol in the academic research context. So people use it as a sandbox or a toy TE to design all kinds of protocol in the blockchain context. So now, and in that context, most people, when they refer to TEs, is Intel SGX or now Intel TDX and a bit of maybe AMD SCV, but that's for the most part, oftentimes people kind of equate TEs with Intel SGX. So now, if we zoom in on this, is that these trusted execution environments, their entire security rests on a private key in a way that is burnt into the hardware. So, and it is assumed that this private key is very, very difficult to extract. Basically, if these things are a bit complicated to approach, like without giving context, but if we try to make it as brief as possible, the idea you have a piece of hardware, and it's the same, by the way, with phones and other things like a hardware wallet. In the chip, there's a root key from which all the cryptographic operations are derived. Now, again, if that root key cannot be accessed, then the security of the chip and the hardware holds. But if an attacker can access this private key, then they can break the entire security of the system. So in the case of Intel SGX, it was not really designed to withstand physical attackers. So that's why nowadays, most people, what they do, they'll run the trusted TE behind a cloud, and they assume that the cloud provider is not going to attack or try to extract that key. Okay, by the way, I should say, what does it mean if we extract the key? The simplest way to think about it is impersonation attacks. Basically, it means that if you have access to the key, you can impersonate any software and hardware, because the entire security of a TE rests on remote attestation. I don't know, it's a bit hard there's different angles to approach that, but I don't know if that, and
why don't you explain what is remote attestation? What is it, and why does it matter in layman's terms?
Okay, because the idea when we interact with a TE, it is remote, right? It's not in your home. It's not like you have your phone with you, your laptop, or some hardware device with you. We're outsourcing a computation, right? In secret network or other networks, blockchain networks, the validators are running TEs, and they're not located where you are. So the computers, when they communicate, they need to check, is it running the software that I expect? Is it running the hardware that I expect? So remote attestation is like a proof, basically. You can think of it like there's a prover and a verifier, and the verifier is somewhere else. So it gets this remote attestation report that is signed by the hardware. And now this is where this key comes into play. That key, you can think of it as the signing key that signs a little report that says, hey, this is the hardware that I'm using, and this is the software that I'm running. And because we trust the key, actually, because we think it is embedded in the hardware, it's not accessible, then we trust the report. But if someone has access to the key, they can sign anything they want. So they can craft a report that says, yes, I am there, I'm running this, and I have this hardware, this software, and they sign it, and I check, because the only thing that the remote verifier has is the report. They don't have access to the physical infrastructure. They don't see where it is and what it is. So they just check the report. And if they just check, actually they check the signature. Okay, and they have to check the content of the report, but the authenticity of the report is based on the signature check. So it means anyone who has access to the root key, that signing key, can craft any report saying whatever they want, and it will look legit. So, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. So we have actually, and that's why it's like quite criticized by the Web3 industry, because we have really a trust, right? We need to trust that this key is not being touched via physical attacks. And that's why it got very criticized, because in Web3 we think about we need to implement centralization to eliminate this trust to centralized entities, and this is what we want to optimize, right? So this criticism is not there, and specifically trust is not, like, we don't necessarily need to trust, right? Were there any attacks that happened like this already that you can think of, that why we start to think now that we need to change it?
That's the problem. No, there are no attacks. This is where it's been a bit strange. In the past 4 or 5 years that I've looked into this, it's always speculative. Like, depending who you talk to, they'll say, yeah, but it's too hard. Because that key, by the way, is burnt. In the case of Intel SGX and TDX is the same as far as I know. AMD SCV is likely something similar. It's burned into a fuse, an electronic fuse. And you can think of it like in simple layman terms, it's like a very, very small, hyper small tattoo in the chip, right? The bits, like say the key 256 bits 01, they're like burnt like a little tattoo in the chip. So it's always there, permanently there. So that means it's just a question of having equipment that is precise enough to go read it. But the problem, you need to maybe destroy the chip in the process and all that. So it's always speculative, and there's lots of reverse engineering to be done. And from the people I've talked, the hardware researchers, because I'm not a hardware researcher, the hardware researchers who would be capable to do that, and at least in the academic context, they're just not interested in doing that, because the amount of effort that is required and what they're going to get about a paper, a publication, is not worth it, because Intel itself does not claim to be resistant to such attacks. that's the thing. By design, and Intel is upfront about that, it's not meant to be resistance against physical attacks. And here we mean side channel attacks, fault injection attacks, and so on. And we're using it in a context where we would ideally want that it's resistant to physical attacks. Basically, it's like because we don't have anything better,
Right.
we have to do with that. So the problem is not so much with Intel SGX or TDX or not. They were just not designed for the Web3, the hostile, if you want, Web3 environments.
I've heard some people propose a solution where you put the servers in space. They're in a satellite.
Yeah, like Space Coin. Yeah.
Yeah, so they can't be attacked. So that's a way of bolstering Intel's, by design, they're not designed to withstand physical attacks. So you add that layer of physical protection.
Yeah. You still have the problem that before you launch, someone could have tampered with the device and extracted that key. And then we still have the problem that, okay, the manufacturer itself, do they know what the key? Do they have a database of chips, serial numbers, whatever, along with the root key, that signing key? But by the way, I'd like to mention this because when we talk about that, sometimes I think now it's a bit changing, but it's because people will kind of be either for T's and they find arguments why it's good, and there's other people who are maybe very kind of more hardcore, like mathematics minded, like and think it's only with cryptography that you can resolve issues. So they'll be totally against T's. And I find myself a bit kind of oscillating between the two, or a bit. But I think it's not, my personal take is more optimistic in the sense it's more that we need to work towards something. The problem that we have seen with being kind of stuck, if you want, with Intel SGX is that unlike with software that you can just improve it, we're just like dealing as though that we cannot change the hardware. Yeah, right. Because if you start thinking, oh, there may be all solutions to improve the security, the thing changes drastically. You understand, right? Basically the view that someone has of TEs then can change drastically because you're not thinking about TEs like as Intel SGX. You're thinking as TEs as just hardware that can be designed in a new way and implemented in a new way, just like with software.
So you're saying that TEs, because TEs are associated with Intel SGX, people conflate those two things. Intel SGX is the same with TEs, and so the opinion is the same.
Yeah, and rightfully so, because Intel SGX has a very bad reputation in the hardware research communities, as far as I understand. Very, very bad. It's just not, and it's nothing against Intel itself, because my understanding is that they did not design that to be used in this kind of, again, this hostile, decentralized environments that is Web3. So it's just, I think we're not using basically I think as a community, we just need to pour lots of effort into pushing the boundaries of what can be done with secure hardware. Just like we have done with zero knowledge proofs and people are doing with FHE and so on, with cryptography in general and distributed systems like consensus protocols, the same thing needs to happen with hardware. There's no reason why we have to be stuck, with something that was not really designed for our community. So then when you adopt this stance, it's actually very interesting. It's just like any other fields, like zero knowledge proofs, let's say, that are, let's say at the beginning were very not performance, or suffering in performance, or like with FHE, people are still optimistic because they could think of solutions and ways to improve it. So when you start adopting this mindset, it's a very different.
That's a really interesting way of framing it. That the hardware that we're using, we're evolving the software to use the hardware, but the hardware itself is not evolving. So you're taking that assumption out of the picture and saying, what if we evolve the hardware?
And it's a bit a problem, by the way, even in academia and also in the industry, there's a bit of a split, a gap between people who do software and people who do hardware. They don't necessarily communicate that much. So the two worlds are a bit separate. And I think the blockchain world, perhaps except for Bitcoin mining equipment, it's been mostly focused on software. At least that's from my vantage point, maybe depending who you talk to, but yeah.
I have a funny story about that. So I'm a software engineer. When I told my brother-in-law that I was a software engineer, I was an engineer at one point, and he said, "Oh, are you a real engineer or a software engineer?"
Yeah, in Quebec,
hardware.
we have this problem too, because engineering, I don't know how it is. Anyways, in Canada, even like, right, you can be in the order of engineer. Anyways, yeah,
Yeah.
the term engineer also it's actually, I felt often at the beginning, I would just put developer. Yeah, I felt uncomfortable using the term engineer,
Engineer.
because engineer means that you build bridges and something like that, right?
Right. That's
Like
the
real physical
question.
things,
Right. Real things.
But also to the topic of the hardware, where you talked about the image of Intel, I remember how it really also affected a lot of the Web3 projects. I mean, Secret and Fana also mainly only use SGX, and it was a big change in strategy and implementation to add other hardware also, right? Not only rely on one hardware manufacturers. And remember how the customers and users really, if they didn't really understand how the T's work or how each project used it differently, how it could really affect to sell the product, like our services in confidential compute. And one strategic move to overcome this was really to add several manufacturers, like to also implement AMD, ARM, or even IBM even Amazon, I think, also have TE hardware. So to provide more variety, this is just one, I think, very light adjustment. But then there are, of course, the very deep optimizations, right, that you also come up with. I mean, sending something to space is like very extreme, but also something to say, how about open sourcing the chip, right? This is one approach that you also touch on. Yeah, just wanted to mention this.
Yeah, of course, because at the core, right, we have the problem that the chips is just like when someone downloads a file, right? That I send you a file, let's say, and you download it from the internet or something. We can check the checksum, the hash, right? So we know what the hash of a file should be, the expected hash, and then we can check it to make sure that we're downloading the proper file. The problem, we don't have this with hardware. So the same, right? If you buy any hardware, how do you know that the hardware has not been tampered with, that it's really the hardware? So we don't have this way of checking hardware right now. It's very limited what we can do. And so anyways, it's a bit of a rabbit hole, this thing, or a bit complex, but that's the challenge we're dealing with. Because with software, right, I think any protocol right now, the code is open source, and so people can audit the code and verify even for themselves, or they can rely on people who have done audits, but the code is open source. You can see it. With hardware, first, the design, the hardware design is not even open source, and the implementation, the chip, it's very hard to verify. But if you don't even have the open source design, what are you supposed to verify, right? So it's a very different, it's very obscure technology that we have to deal with. If the technical term here is like, it's like we're talking about, like, let's say in modern cryptography, we have this concept of that everything should be available to the attacker except the root key, the private key. And it's the Kirchhoff's principle, and it's like the apparatus, okay, the device used to encrypt and decrypt should be known to the attacker except the private key.
Right.
So with hardware, it's different. People have approached, for the most part, security through obscurity or obfuscation. So they will purposefully not disclose the design and even make it overly more complex, just to confuse an attacker that would try to reverse engineer it.
So is your goal to create an open source TE that follows the same principle, where everything is known to the attacker except the root key?
Yeah, that's what some people want to do. I mean, I'm part of that effort in the periphery, in a way, more as because again, I'm not right now, I'm not a hardware engineer, and I don't work for a hardware company, but that's been what I was looking a lot into in the past months. And first, I saw a couple of days ago, there was an announcement, Open Titan is going to go into production. So there's been efforts like led by Google. This is like an open source RISC-V chip. And in the past, by the way, there's been like, in terms of, in the context of secure hardware, out of IC3, actually, Dawnsong, along with others, they had the Keystone, which is the kind of open source trusted execution environment framework, but it's the software layer. You still need a root of trust coming from the hardware to be there. So they still need to complement it with hardware, but they did still a lot of work to have an open source software stack, if you want, that does everything except what is required by the hardware.
So if you were to fast forward, 3 years, you've had 3 years to do research on whatever you wanted, the sky's the limit. What is your ideal outcome? What would you love to see happen? What do you think is the solution that will solve the most problems, and what would you want to have to do with that?
Yeah, it's a very good question, actually. So I think the most complicated thing to resolve for this space, okay, if we rely on hardware for security, okay, is remote attestation. Because no matter what we have, no matter how secure the hardware is, right? Let's say just top, it's 100% perfect, okay? But someone made it. So, and then even if we trust the manufacturer, we trust everything, okay? You're talking to a device that is remotely, that you don't see, that you cannot expect. How do you know that it's like what it is supposed to be? It's a really serious challenge. And my understanding of it is that by the laws, if you want, of classical physics, it's just not even possible. So one thing I would like to see is that an impossibility result, that someone clearly does some kind of rigorous, I don't know if some kind of rigorous like work that proves that it's just impossible to achieve that. And then we need quantum physics. Because in quantum physics, they have this problem too. Quantum computing, quantum hardware faces the same problem too, but they have treated the problem very differently. They call it device-independent cryptography, which means that the device you're communicating with, just like right now, okay, let's say if we dumb this down, okay, you're talking to me, but how do you know that I'm the real me? It's like the Mission Impossible movie, right? With these masks that they have, how do you know that I'm the real me, right? And I'm remote, right? So that it adds complexity to the task of verification. So one way would be that you ask me questions, a bunch of questions that only me should know, okay? And based on the answers, at some point, that's got to be the real person because only him really, really knows that. So that's kind of what they do, okay? So, but we cannot, as far as I understand, okay, I'm not deep right now in that topic, but as far as I understand, with classical hardware, we cannot really do that. Like where you just, basically you have to treat the hardware you're communicating with like a black box because you're not able to go peek into it, right? Because it's remote. So just by querying it, asking it a bunch of questions, challenges, and checking its responses, then you can, okay, that's the real one. That's an authentic device. So to go back to your question, in the 3-year span, my ideal would be that we make progress in understanding the limitations of hardware when we use it, and perhaps even invite the possibility of considering like using quantum hardware. Okay, because the quantum hardware there's some, I don't think it's that far-fetched to assume we could use quantum hardware in our context. So it could be that we have all kinds of hybrid models or something where you combine or you compose your protocol with different pieces of hardware, and for that critical part where the security rests on the hardware, and you would like fall back, or you would have like a quantum hardware component. Right. But I think we can get there in iterative approaches. So we don't need that now. And it doesn't mean that what we're doing now is wrong or is doomed. Not at all. It's the opposite, actually. What we're doing now is to contribute to evolving in that direction.
I mean, now we already, I think it's a very interesting approach to create more and more hybrid infrastructure or hardware or approaches, right, for security. I mean, we do this now already with like adding TE to the blockchain. That's why we need to make the TE hardware Web3 ready. And then we add even quantum hardware to it. So I think that's definitely what will make sense to really make the new internet very diverse also from the technologies, to take from every technology the most important or most valuable for the user. Does the idea with the quantum hardware also adds to like the hardware research that already exists? I think you're mentioning a combination of like paths and also the root of trust in your paper. Would this be like an add-on to then come up with the full solution?
Can you define puffs?
Yeah. Okay. So,
thank you.
Well, okay, puffs, you can think of it as a fingerprint. Just again, I was saying like, okay, like let's say, how do I know that you're the real you, right? The real Lisa, real Zoe. So one way will be check your fingerprint. Okay, that's one way to identify someone, right, with the fingerprint. But of course, you need a database then of fingerprints that checks, oh yeah, this is real, that's a fingerprint of Zoe, that's for Lisa, and so on. But still, okay, when you're dealing with the person, so you have a kind of trusted registry of people. So it's the same with devices. You can imagine you have trusted registry of devices. with their fingerprint. Here the fingerprint's coming from the puff. So puff means physically unclonable function. To backtrack, okay, like why we're talking about this again, okay, because again, all the hardware, right, relies on the a signing key that signs a remote attestation report. And we have to trust that this signing key is embedded in hardware that we trust, right? But you could think of now that signing key a bit like the fingerprint, in the sense that the signing key, right, you verify with a public key, and the public key, you could think of it as the fingerprint, right? In the sense that if it checks, it matches, that means, oh yeah, that's the correct fingerprint. I'm not explaining this well. What I'm trying to say is that when the signature verifies correctly, right, it's equivalent in a way, or it's similar that if you would verify a fingerprint, because it convinces you that this is the authentic device I'm talking to. Now, as I said at the beginning, currently, let's say with Intel SGX and other hardware, the key is burned into the hardware. And this burning process is oftentimes also done by the manufacturer. So they kind of know the key in a way, where they have a process that does it. So you could speculate or say, hey, maybe the manufacturer was able to see the key when it was put into the hardware. Okay. So an alternative to that is to use puffs or TRNGs, like true random number generators, where the key is intrinsically, the key term is intrinsic security here. So it's intrinsically generated in the device. So it means when you power up the device, there's a little circuit such that will generate the key when you power up the device. So the key, first of all, then is not injected into the hardware. That's one thing. Okay. It does not come from the outside. It's just like it's just the chip is designed in such a way that when you power it up, when current flows in the chip, a key appears, if you want.
Is that a persistent key? Would that be a persistent key, same key every time you power it up?
Yes, with puffs allows us to do that. Yeah, so that's the idea of the puff, so that you can generate the key, and it's kind of stored in the sense that each time the device is powered up, the same key appears. It's deterministic.
So we're verifying the root of trust with the puff, the root key also.
Now, the puff, okay, is derived from the circuitry of the chip. You can think it's derived from the physical characteristics of the chip that vary from one chip to the other. They vary. So then that's why it acts as a kind of biometric for the chip, or a fingerprint for the chip. Because
can't be reverse engineered.
No, the thing, if you try to peek into the chip, you will disturb a bit the electrical activity of the chip, and you will create noise, like physical noise in the chip. And that noise then will cause the function, the puff, to generate a different key, right? This stuff is a bit complicated but it's a bit like, think a bit of your fingerprint, and if someone was trying to peek into you, right, and intrusive or whatever, your fingerprint will change, right? It's like if you would disturb the system, like, and then it will cause the fingerprint to change. So only when left unobserved, the true fingerprint would appear.
Right.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So this we can do today. Okay. Puffs are used. They're used a lot in IoTs. There's all kinds of puffs, and obviously, security questions also come to play. Which puffs are secure and which are less secure and not secure, and so on. And people can try to attack puffs. So it's the same with like anything. But still, the security provided by puffs is by far superior to what we have. And this is the known thing. There's this, if anyone wants to dive deep into Intel SGX and does not know so much about it, I think many people will recommend this paper called Intel SGX Explained by Devadas and Costan. I forgot this. So the point is that even in that paper, and this thing's 2016, they do mention that Intel should have used something like puffs. So it's a known thing. Okay, puffs are a known solution. It's not new. Yeah, that's part of the.
So I think it was a good breakdown. I hope that the audience can follow along. And again, this is a deep topic, so everyone can read up on this as well. But so puffs do exist, and then like combining it maybe with open source, or at least like mirroring techniques, right? This is what you talk about. We have at least a little bit of insurance that the chip is being manufactured as it should be. And then the next step, we also say, okay, now how we can verify this, right? These are like what we can do nowadays. And then we also need to think about more techniques to verify it. Is this what we are working towards, correct?
Yeah. By the way, many of these things are open questions, right? Even me now explaining you this,
Yeah.
it's like I can struggle a bit because it's not so obvious, because it's not even clear even is it possible to really get what we want in terms of ultimate security. But one way to think about it is that let's say we'll be making robots, right? And again, to go back to this fingerprinting. And then you have the problem that if you're interacting with a robot remotely, you're not sure, is it the robot that is a legit robot, right? That has been manufactured properly. So what do you need? You need, okay, the design of the robot needs to be correct, right? So it's like, let's say, I don't know, I'm using robot here as an analogy because it can be, someone can play with this in their head as a thought experiment, okay? Because the fingerprint is something easy to think about, like if we, right? So and that design needs to be known. So it needs to be open source already, because if the design is not open source already, you just, was the design even okay? Correct. So the specification needs to be secure, right? The design. So then when it's manufactured, whoever manufactures that, you need to make sure, did they manufacture the expected design? So you need to verify then the physical thing, the physical device needs to be then verified. Okay. So one way could be that it goes through a third party or something like a lab that verifies it, or a bunch of labs, a bunch of third parties, they certify, yes, it's, but to do their verification, they'll need the open source design. Okay. So, because they'll need to check that the physical chip layout matches the design. Just like, think of it like they found a building, like a floor, the map of a building, the floor plan of a building, right? You have the plan, and then you need to go inspect the physical building itself if it just really matches the plan, right? Yep. So it's the same thing, right? It's like you have a layout, chip layout, and you need to check that it matches one for one the design. So now, doing this verification, it's very intensive. It's not easy. People need like scanning electron microscope and all kinds of there needs to skills and instrumentation to do that. So that means that we have this problem now that, okay, we have to trust the people who verify it. Okay. So I'm trying to write, if you think step by step, right, what the challenges here is that,
right.
So, okay, we release the code, the hardware design open source. All right, good. Okay, good first step. Then we manufacture it. Then, okay, did the manufacturer implement it as expected? So we need people who verify it. So we need verifiers of the chip. So now that means now we are moving the trust, right? Now, okay, we don't just trust a closed source design. We don't just trust a manufacturer. Now we have to trust the chip manufacturer. Because, okay, why? Because what's going to happen is these chip verifiers, that's what's happening with IntelliGX right now too. They have a database, if you want, of chip IDs with their corresponding key, signing key.
Right.
It's not exactly like that with the public key, okay? Just so we're clear, okay? Not the public key. So that means that you can use this public key to verify that chip is good because the signature of the remote attestation report verifies. I hope I'm not like going too much in the weeds here, but this is super important to understand that, because again, okay, to just go back to make sure it's clear. If we come back to, okay, now we have this open source design of the hardware, we have a chip manufacturers that makes it, and then we have a set of verifiers, bunch of labs, let's say, that are tasked with inspecting the chip and verifying that it matches the open source design. They will then be responsible to maintain, if you want, a registry of chips with their public key, their public identifier. So you can think of the fingerprint, okay? So that now when I'm interacting with a chip and it gives me its attestation report, I check the signature with this key that I fetch from this public registry. But I do have to trust these verifiers.
Yeah, right.
It's arguably much better. It's a bit like trusting, let's say, an MPC committee or something like that, a multi-party computation committee. So we're doing that's, I think, a reasonable, let's say, how can I say, like, improvement in the coming years that we could expect to see, that we could hope to see. Okay, just to put now the puffs into that, okay? Because that's where it ties all this in. Like, sorry, like, when someone verified this attestation report with this key that they get from the chip registry of verified chips, right? Now, if we do use puffs, okay, what we get, okay, is that, because the problem, okay, that these verifiers, let's say we trust them, no problem. once the chip leaves these labs, anyone can tamper with it. The truck driver, the delivery people, the people who are running the service, the validators, the nodes like operators and so on. We don't know. The people can tamper with it and now modify it. So what was verified is now no longer the same thing. They could have changed it, right? Or extract the key or modify the design because it's not about just extracting the key, is that the hardware is expected to be in a certain, it's expected to match a design that we trust because we trust the open source design. You understand? Just like if you trust software, it's like the same with anything right now. If you trust software like a protocol, well, you're trusting the software that it's implemented correctly and the security of the protocol does. Okay, so it's the same thing. We're trusting an open source design of hardware, assuming that yes, it's secure because it went through all this and so on. But the people who have the chip, they could modify it. So basically it's not the same thing anymore, right? So how do you know that they didn't modify it? So this is where the puff comes in. Okay. So if they modify the hardware, the security, if you want, guarantees of the puffs are such that it's just like if someone would change my DNA, say, my fingerprint will not be the same. So if you change the circuitry of the chip, the puff output, the key that it generates will not be the same. So when you have this public key in the public chip registry of trusted chips, you would check the signature, it wouldn't match. So does that
makes sense?
Yeah, I follow along. I think it's a very, very good breakdown. I just have one clarification question, because often open source chip idea of TEs get also criticized by the ZK people, and like saying, okay, they never will be verifiable kind of. And one feedback was also that the root of trust is just being pushed like more away kind of. And you mentioned that instead of trusting now the manufacturer, we now have several verifiers like in an MPC net.
Yeah.
But we also need to trust these MPC, right? The individual or several verifiers. So how would you argue against this, that we're not just pushing the root of trust further away? Like,
well, I think what you said is that it's just better because MPC is better than trusting a single centralized.
Of course, we just go from centralized to decentralized, but the trust is still there. Yeah,
but
we trust. We need to trust a little bit, yes.
Well, it's like you could think of it even because maybe MPC may be a bit confusing to some listeners, but the thing you could just more even think just like it's like a consensus protocol, right? It's or it's a set of verifiers, but you could even require that everyone needs to agree. It's not even a majority, but what I'm trying to say is that there's different ways to think about this. But yes, to go back to your question, Zoe, is that sure, it's true. It's true that we're pushing the trust just down to something else. But from my vantage point, okay, in my opinion, first, it becomes a more interesting problem because you can see an evolution that things are improving. So I think in that respect, it is a worthwhile effort, okay, because it's not just like because the question to that argument, okay, I think the bigger question is like, what are the limits of what can be done? Is it a pipe dream? Is it like a waste of time? Okay, because it could be that you're just pushing down the thing, but is it like just like an endless attempt that we would never resolve? Without even answering yes or no, I think if you observe the facts of what I just presented as a reasonable potential solution in the coming years, where it's like puff based, and there's other things that are needed, by the way, to harden the security of the hardware, like with hardware masking and so on. But the thing is, like, if we focus on that puff issue because it's linked to the remote attestation, we can see already that it's a huge improvement. Even though, okay, let's say there's 10 labs on the planet and they're certified and legally bound or whatever, liable. Yeah, it's true. There's still a problem. We have to trust these like highly specialized labs. I totally agree with that. Okay. I don't think it's the end game at all. That's why I mentioned earlier this quantum hardware. Okay, because now if we still stick around the puff thing here, there are we have this problem, right? Because when I interact with the device remotely, in a way now I'm trusting a bunch of labs, and people, experts who are verifying chips, and I'm trusting that their certification is honest, that they're not lying or corrupt or something. So let's say, okay, we don't want to do that. Let's say we just do exercise. Now, to address the people that criticize, oh, you're just pushing down the problem. Okay, the question will be, okay, can we do better? Okay, I think yes. Okay, so how? Well, it goes back to what I was saying a bit earlier about this concept of device-independent cryptography. This was introduced, by the way, in '98, I think, in a paper by Andrew Yao and I forgot the other name, Gartner maybe or something. But I could give it to you and you could put it in the podcast notes or something. The idea is that, yeah, you just, like I said, okay, I just ask you questions, bunch of questions that I know that only you would be able to answer. And by asking many questions, like let's say statistically, could be that I have like high confidence that you're the real you. So, and in this way, then we wouldn't have to rely on a set of verifiers, of chip verifiers. Okay, so by being able to query at a distance the hardware device and based on its outputs, on its responses, confirm that, okay, that can only be a good device. Okay, so now I don't know about this, okay, because I'm not deep enough into it, but my understanding is that it may not be possible to do with classical hardware, so we need quantum hardware. But the thing is, like, there is a construct, a puff, that is a more theoretical construct. It's called simple puff. Some people want to look at it. Is it simple puff? Yeah, I think it's simple puff, where it's based on this. It's based on that you query the puff, and if it answers fast enough, you know that, hey, that's a good puff. But okay, this is research here. But the reason why I say that is that there's definitely room to explore and research and try to implement things where one could move away from that to still make progress in improving and then not having to trust or rely on a set of verifiers. Okay. And by the way, in quantum hardware, people have this. Again, I'm just starting to learn about this, but for quantum key distribution, they're capable to do, and I think for randomness, they call it certified source of randomness. So they're capable to, because let's say you do randomness generation with quantum hardware, because it's better randomness, right? You have higher guarantee that the randomness is truly random. Mm-hmm. But now you have this problem. Yeah, but was it really quantum hardware that was used? You know, like, how do I know? So they have this thing, they call it certified randomness, where you can, and it's this device independence. It's like you can check that the device you're interacting with remotely is an authentic device. Does that make sense? So I think that's the ultimate for the zero knowledge people, or not zero knowledge, but for people who are really think this T is a pipe dream, which basically I really used to think, really like, so I think that's the thing to really look at, device independent cryptography. I think that's if we have that, then it's like, yeah, that's it. I mean, it looks to me that it seems to be, it could be possible. Yeah. The problem is it may require quantum hardware. Right. I don't see what's the problem. Why not?
Okay, maybe if it requires quantum hardware, this question doesn't apply. But if it doesn't, do you see any issues with you've talked a lot about open source, doing open source. Do you see any problems with patents? Because I'm sure that patents exist. Yes, patents exist on the existing TE hardware that's out there. Do you see would it be more difficult to do an open source TE because of the existing patents?
I mean, I'm not a patent expert, but this reminds me, as a software engineer, at some point I came across Peter Hingens, as a Belgian software engineer and a thinker and writer. And he was heavily involved in the open source communities. And he was the man behind, along with others, but ZeroMQ, which a lot of software engineers would know, like a messaging library. Mm-hmm. And Facility gave a great keynote talk in Berlin in 2014 at a EuroPython conference, and it was called Our Decentralized Future. So basically, his talk was about decentralization, but it was not in the context of blockchains and Bitcoins. It was just in context of software. Now, why am I mentioning all of this? He was heavily against patent, and he passed away, sadly. But I think he was a great, great mind, and a lot of his writings was not blockchain or crypto currency, whatever, focused, because it was just in the context of distributed systems and decentralized systems. And I think there's a lot that the blockchain community could still learn from him. But yeah, patents are not good. I mean, it's like, no, I mean, I don't think we should rely on patents at all. And they're problematic. I mean,
Yeah, I'm not
Because even all
saying
this, like
relying
this
on
stuff about
patents.
puffs and all that. Yeah.
And I'm saying
Yeah.
that they exist, so you might
Yeah.
run
Yeah.
afoul of existing patents if you tried to do this open source. Just wondering if you thought about that.
That we should file?
No, that you might violate some patents.
No, I know. People know about this. Some hardware researchers we have been in touch, they're well aware of that. That means that it may further complicate or add extra challenges that even though you have a good idea, if the thing is patented, that
Right.
you cannot use that.
Right.
Yeah, it's true. That's why also that's why I think rightfully so too. A lot of people maybe don't want to. I guess it's a bit like almost like a chicken and egg problem because of that, people then don't want to touch hardware and they try to solve everything with software.
Right.
But then what T's have done in a way, they have pushed in a way they're pushing, I think, a bit. At least for me, this is what it has done. Okay, I don't want to talk for others, but it's pushed me in a corner where I have to question. Okay, do we really have to use hardware? Can we do without hardware? And I think what the conclusion, at least what the point of view that some people have taken is that no, you can really do a lot of cool things. You can do a lot of things that you cannot do only purely with cryptography, purely with software, basically. Okay. And I think then, okay, what I'm trying to say is that if we don't work on something, obviously nothing is going to happen. So if we don't try to resolve an issue, well, yeah, the issue will not resolve itself. So we haven't worked on hardware. IntelliJ came out, I think, around 2014. So if in 2014, this blockchain community would have started working on these problems related to hardware, would be maybe in a very different place nowadays. And there wouldn't be this discussion about T or no T and all this like, IntelliJ, this and that. It's like, no, we would have maybe a diversity of hardware that are more tailored to our needs. So the problem, we have not worked on that. So I think we need to crack the door open. I mean, basically, we need to work on it. And then I think there's all kinds of improvements we can do. And then the patent stuff, yeah, we'll have to deal with it and figure it out. But I think this community is really good at figuring out things. So for me, I'm not worried about that. Yeah.
It's always about starting seeding the how do you say? Seeding the plant, right? Yeah.
Planting the
seed. Sorry, planting the seed. Yes.
It's okay.
Planting the seed about an idea.
I know that German grammar works in a different order, so it's okay.
So planting the seed about, first of all, thinking optimistic, saying, yes, we hear the criticism, but it is innovative to combine TE hardware with blockchain. But now how we overcome these criticisms, and the critics are there, but there are ideas. So I really enjoyed this conversation today and to bring you on to really give people a lot of light and to also promote your amazing research and like all the questions that you're raising, right? Because you're always very pioneer in saying, okay, asking these critical questions, but also trying to work on finding solutions for this, right? We also met in last in Bangkok, like a lot of workshops that we are working on, sitting in the room with like the people that actually build the protocols or have the hardware. I mean, you have a great network also with hardware manufacturers or individuals. So I think it's really important for the people to understand that we also know we need to raise questions, ask questions, but there are ideas to work on. And I think it's very important to bring this message also to people that want to participate, right? We are building alliances. We also, of course, would like to fund this kind of research. So I would really encourage everyone that listen in today to follow Sylvain also on Twitter, on X. He always brings up amazing content.
I just wanted to add something to that, which is that a true researcher is asking questions, not driving towards an objective. And Sylvain is a perfect example of a true researcher. He's always like uncovering the questions, and really approaching the problems with an open mind is very difficult to do if you're a business person because you're looking for that profit margin, right? But I really appreciated this conversation. I agree with Zoe. Follow Sylvain if you want to have your mind challenged and your assumptions challenged and start thinking in a different way.
Beautiful.
Thank you so much.
Cool.
All right.
Any last words from your end, Sylvain, or word to the audience?
Okay, let's put it this way. Yeah, I'll say a thing. Like, so one way to take, if someone wants to take a really giant step back here, right? We're in this space where it's about actually Bitcoin and all that was about solving the problem of digital cash, right? So, but that problem actually was worked on way before at all kinds of phases, right? But one could go back to at least quantum money in the, I think, end of 60s or early 70s, Steven Weisner. So why do I mention this is that with quantum money, there's a hardware component, okay? At least there's a physics. What is hardware? Hardware is physics, okay? It's a physical thing. So there's a physical component. You could think of it that, okay, there was this idea of doing digital cash with quantum physics, with quantum money. Then, okay, this is more of a funny, let's say, interesting and theoretical idea. And it still is, okay? It has not been figured out how to exactly do that. But the reason why I mentioned that, in that process, now, okay, we had then Bitcoin, and here we are now, and we're solving the problem of double spending the way we're doing it. And then T's have somehow managed to make their place in the space. The reason why I mentioned that, I think, is like, again, if you take a giant step back, it makes sense to consider the place of a physical device in the context of security. Okay, that's what I'm trying to say. Okay, it's almost like more of a philosophical statement here, but the point I'm trying to say is that, because, okay, some people will be down, oh, you should solve everything just with software. You should always think the hardware is just like rogue. And I've been a bit, again, these are just my thoughts, okay? But the thing I'm trying to say is that, to me, I'm more on the view now that it makes sense to consider, no, you have to consider that there's a piece of physical apparatus, okay? Like, so there's hardware, and it's part of the system.
Right.
And we can work on improving also that part of the system. So the positive thing about T's now is that they're inviting us to look at hardware and to see how can we improve the hardware.
Right.
So I think it's then one can have a very positive outlook on anything about T's, in that sense that, no, it's about can we do better? Can we improve the hardware? Okay, that's the mindset that now, that where this has led me. But I can understand people who are like skeptical and all that, like 100%. Okay, but I'm just trying to say is that if you think of it like, okay, this quantum money. Okay, the thing I forgot to say, this puff thing. Okay, this puff, it's physically unclonable function. The work that led to that was actually inspired by quantum money. And quantum. Right. So I think there's this, like, there's a way that you can see that these things are very interconnected in a very, very interesting way. Anyways, people are, anyways, it's just my own view of the thing, but I think there's a way to see these things.
Yeah, you're saying zoom out, and Bitcoin solved the problem that quantum money brought up, but it solved it in a completely different way. And you're saying that TEs are part of the hardware, and we've tried to solve it by just working on software, but we actually have to recognize that hardware is an integral part of the system. And so that's another vector for improvement, a whole new way of thinking about how to improve it. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah. And it becomes a work of composition. It's not about this or that. It's how can I compose things together, where I use T along with others. And some people are doing that already, and I've done that. But the problem, again, is like, of course, if someone thinks of the hardware as almost like an unchangeable, unmodifiable thing, like fixed, right? A static thing that cannot be improved, yes, it's problematic. And then I would be in the camp of, let's not use TEs, okay? But if they can be changed and improved and, worked on, then it's and that's why I mentioned quantum money, because the things have evolved and are evolving. We don't live in a frozen in time. Things evolve. So hardware is evolving and will evolve and will keep on evolving. So I think it makes sense to leverage hardware then, if you look at things this way.
I think your tagline should be "Challenge your assumptions."
Sure.
Good.
I mean, but that's.
No, it's very inspiring. It's very inspiring, and I think you summarized it nicely to zoom out and to inspire the people how to look at it. Right. And again, we don't have all the answers yet. We are still asking questions, but we want to start the movement. We want to start working on these things. So, I think we would wrap it up here for today. Maybe when we have time for another session throughout the next month to go a bit more deeper into whatever the audience would like to hear. But big thank you from my side.
Yep. Thank you, Sylvain. Thank you.
Thank you.
And
thank you for having me.
This has been an episode of Spilling the Tea podcast, and we will be back to you soon with the next episode. Thank you for joining us.